Hi everyone, this is Ravi. Welcome back to Postman Beginners Tutorial. This is our lesson 8 on Postman tool concepts. In this lesson, I'm going to teach you how can we create tests within the Postman and how can we create a quick scripts within the Postman by using snippets. Please do subscribe to the channel. Click on bell icon. You'll receive notifications whenever I publish more videos. Thank you. Okay, so in this lesson, I'm going to teach you how can we create scripts using snippets option at collection level by using Postman. And also, I'm going to teach you how can we create scripts using snippets at API request level and also at folder level. And what are the tests in Postman? And I'm going to teach you how can we create tests at collection level, and you can create tests at folder level, and also you can create tests at API request level. And then I'm going to teach you how can we analyze the test results. So this might end up in two sessions. Probably this might be our part 1 session, and probably I might end up publishing another part for these concepts to cover. Now let's jump onto the system and see how can we perform all these actions by using Postman tool. So this is my Postman tool. Okay, so in our previous session, if you remember, we have already worked on the post request, get request, and also I have explained you about environment variables, global variables, and then lot of other concepts. Okay, I would recommend you guys to please do visit those sessions before you watch the session. Okay, so now, so this is my request message, API request message to get a single user detail, right? So whenever I send this, it's going to retrieve me the user. If you see the endpoint here, so this is my global variable where I'm storing the URL, part of URL. Okay, and here I'm sending the user ID. If I send user ID 3, then it's going to retrieve me another person. If you see Emma Wong, if I send user 5, it's going to return fifth user, Charles Morris, right? So that's the single user request message. Okay, so now instead of sending this hard coded value, I would like to send a random value. Okay, so for that, so how can I do that? So for that, let me just save this. Okay, so how can I send the random values? So before I explain those concepts, let's see, there is a concept called pre-request script. Pre-request script, that means before I send this request, what are all the actions that you would like to perform, so that you can define in pre-request script here. Okay, so then how can I write the script? So this entire script happens in JavaScript, okay, in Postman. Okay, so there is a concept called snippets. Okay, so by using these snippets, you can quickly write the scripting. For example, if I want to set a global variable, I want to set a global variable. So as I told you, instead of sending this constant value, I would like to send a random value. For that, what I need to do, before I run this request, I need to generate a random value, and store that into a variable before I run this particular request. So that's the reason I would like to use my pre-request script. So here, to generate a random value, I would like to define a constant. My constant will be user ID. This is my user ID. I'm going to store that constant random value generated constant value into user ID. Okay. And I'm going to use my math function dot floor, and here math dot random. Okay. And then I would like to multiply by 10, and then I would like to add 1. Why? Because it's going to generate the random value of 1 digit. Okay. It's going to generate a random value of 1 digit. Done. Now I'm generating a random value and I'm storing it in user ID. But I need to define a global variable so that I can store this user ID random value, so that I can store this random value into a global variable. How can I do that? It's simple. You need to use snippet. Set a global variable. So let me select this snippet. As soon as you click on this set a global variable snippet, it's going to generate your script automatically. PM, which means postman.globals.set. What is the key value that you would like to keep? Okay, I would like to name this as user ID because I'm passing the user ID here, right? I want to pass the user ID random value under this. So I'm naming this global variable as user ID. And what is the value? My value is this one. Whatever the random digit that is generated from here, right? So I would like to pass that as a value. Okay, and save this. So that means now I'm setting a global variable called user ID. If I go to my environments from the left side panel and go to globals, so let me delete this. Okay, so if you see here, I don't have a global variable called user ID here now. Okay, I already saved it under globals. I have only two variables, id1, id2. Now in this request we are setting a global variable before I run this session. Basically, when I run this request, first it's going to execute your pre-request script, and then only it's going to execute your request. So now let me execute this. Okay, let me execute this. Send a request. I sent a request, but the ID is generated 5 only because I specified 5 constant. But I want to verify whether it's generated a it's created a global variable or not. Okay, let's go back to environment globals. If you see, it created a new global variable called user ID. And what is the random value that it generated? It generated 10. Let me generate one more time. Let me send the request one more time. Let's go back to here again. If you see, this time it generated a random value 9, and that is stored in a variable called user ID, right? So now let's remove this again. Let's remove this again. So now we are generating a random value, but I want to use this user ID global variable in the URL. So how can we do that? To get a global variable, you need to specify your variable name here. Okay, so let's go back to environment collections and globals. Let me save this. Okay, so now if you come here, so now if you see, this is not defined yet because the user ID variable is not generated, not created yet. Okay, I'm just specifying here as a user ID as variable because I'm setting up the same variable. Okay, save this. So now let's see, currently I don't have a global variable called user ID. That's why it's throwing error message saying unresolved. But however, when I run this, before running this script itself, it's going to create this user ID as a variable and it's going to store the random value, and then the same thing will be passed here. Okay, now let's send this. So if you see, This time id is 7. That means it generated a random value of 7, and then it's created a user id global variable, and it stored that 7 here. Let's go here and see now. Under globals, you can see user id, and you already have a random value of 7. And the same thing has been passed here, and then I'm getting the details of 7th user here. Now let me send it again. This time 6. Let me send it again. This time 3. If you go back to environment variables again, globals, this times 3, correct? And the same thing has been sent here also, right? So now, what about if I want to set an environment variable? What I can do? So let me do one thing. Set an environment variable. Select this. If you see here, pm.environment.set. Here, I want to set a user ID 1 this time. The variable name, the environment variable name as user ID 1. And what is the value? I want to pass the same value here also. Let's put this here. Pass the same value. Save it and send it. If you see now, let's go back to environments, and I can see here. Okay, let me close this. Okay, let me delete this one more time. Okay, let me execute one more time. Okay, give me a minute. Save this. Because earlier the global variable was there. Okay, let me send this again. So now it should create a global variable user ID, and it should create an environment variable called user ID 1. If I go to environment, but which environment? It created a under QA environment. If I go back here, if you see, because I have selected an environment as QA, that's why. Let's assume if I don't select any environment, okay? Let's go back to QA environment, delete this global variable, delete this environment variable. Because now I'm not selecting any environment. If I execute this now, what happens? If I go to here, it's not going to generate any environment variable in any environment because I have not selected any environment here. Let's assume I want to select a production environment now. Okay. Now let's send this now. As soon as I send, now it should create an environment variable under environment production. Right? Send it. And now go back to environments. Now this time select prod environment. You see here, I can see user ID, environment variable and the corresponding value. If you see here, the same thing has been sent here, 4, correct? Now that is done. And what about if I want to create a variable at collection level? So what do you mean by collection level? If you see here in earlier sessions, right, I have explained you how can you create variables at collection level. Okay, so let's delete let's keep it here. Okay, how can we create the variables at collection level? I already showed you. We created manually a variable called URL, and we are storing that variable here at collection level, right? So now I want to create this kind of variable by using script. How can I do that? So now let's set a collection variable. Select this snippet and I want to name this as user ID 3. And what is the value I want to store? I want to store the same value from random value that we are generating here. Okay, and save this. Now when I run this particular request, it should create. So I'll do one thing. I'm gonna comment out this one. Okay, so it should, when I run this, it should create a variable at collection level. Okay, if you see currently at collection level I have only URL. Okay, variable URL. So now let's send this. Before it send the request, it's going to create a variable at collection level. Okay, if I go back here, if you see, user ID 3 is created and the random value that is generated has been stored here. Okay, so this is the way you can basically generate the global variable, variables at collection level. Let's assume if I want to clear this collection level variable, what I'm going to do? So I want to clear, see, as soon as the test case is executed, as soon as my request is executed successfully, I want to clear this environment variable, and then I want to clear this global variable, sorry, collection level variable. So then what are we going to do? Clear environment variable. What is the variable that you want to clear? I want to clear this user ID 1 and select clear collection variable from snippet. And what is the variable that you want to delete? I want to delete user ID 3. Right? I want to clear this. Save it here. Now, if you see under environment, under production, you already have user ID 1. Under collections, at the collection level, you have user ID 3. Correct? So now, when I execute this script now, it's going to create user ID 1 and it's going to store the random value, and then immediately it's going to clear that particular variable. In the same way, collection level. If I run this, now I should not see any environment variable called user ID 1 and I should not see any collection level variable called user ID 3. Let's go back to environment. Under production, see, I don't have user ID 1 now because it's after execution, it's deleted, it's cleared. Sorry, before execution, it's cleared. Okay. In the same way, collection level, it's cleared your user ID 3. So that means, let's assume, generally we don't use this setting up environment and clearing the environment in the same request. Generally what happens? Probably delete this here. I want to copy this here. In generally what happens? In the next request, I want to delete here. Okay. In the same way, I want to clear my environment variable. See, in real time, I'm talking about in real time, we generally don't clear the values we generally don't use set and clear values in the pre-request script of same request. Okay. So what I'm going to do, user ID 1. Generally, in the next request, before I execute this request message, I want to clear out all the variables that I have created in my previous script. Right? So when I execute this entire collection, when I execute this entire folder, then it's going to create the global variables, environment variables, and then collection variables. So let's send this. If you see here, now I should have global level variable, user ID, environment level variable, user ID 1, collection level variable, user ID 3. But, so here, let me clear even global variable. Clear global variable also. Let me clear a global variable. Global variable name is user ID. So now I want to move this clearing the global variable in the next request. I cleared everything. Save it. So now when I execute this, it already set up all the global variables, environment variables, collection variable. Now in the next request, when I execute this, it should clear all of them. Execute this and see here, global, it's cleared, environment, it's cleared, and collection, it's cleared. You understand, right? So it's really very important concept, guys. This is how you can run your pre-request scripts before running your actual API request. So you can, it's really very, very useful in the corporate world how to create your pre-request scripts so that you can create different types of variables, okay, and then you can use them while sending the request. Okay, hope you all understand. So now what is our next agenda? Next agenda item is tests. How can we create test cases? I mean, how can we automate your request messages? That means how can you automate your test cases to validate the API request messages? So that I'm going to explain you in the upcoming session, immediate next session. Okay, stay tuned. So if you have any queries, please do provide your queries in the comment box. I'll try to respond. Please do subscribe to the channel, click on bell icon. You'll receive notifications whenever I publish more videos. Thank you.